By the time anyone understood what had happened, it was already over. The challenge had been public, the room crowded, the imbalance obvious. A man nearly twice his size stepped forward, confident that weight would decide the outcome. 11 seconds later, no one was speaking, not because of violence, but because nothing they expected had occurred, and nothing they believed about strength survived the silence that followed. The gym was not meant for spectacle. It was a converted space. Bare floors, worn mats, the smell of canvas and disinfectant still lingering from earlier sessions. No banners, no mirrors arranged for show, just enough room for movement, and enough quiet for people who took movement seriously. Those who arrived that afternoon did so without announcement. Some were instructors from nearby schools. Others were fighters who trained there irregularly, drawn by routine rather than reputation. A few had heard something less specific, that someone unusual would be present, and that an informal test might occur. No one spoke about it directly. In places like this, language was economical. Bruce Lee arrived without ceremony. There was no change in the room when he entered, no pause in conversation, no turning of heads all at once, only a gradual recognition, as individuals noticed him in their own time. He did not claim space. He took none beyond what was necessary to warm his hands, adjust his footing, and observe. He wore no distinctive gear, no belt that signaled rank, nothing that asked to be acknowledged. Those who knew him understood this was deliberate. Those who did not assumed little. That assumption would remain uncorrected for some time. The gym itself had a quiet hierarchy. It favored people who showed up consistently, not loudly. Strength was respected, but it was expected to prove itself repeatedly. Reputation here did not travel far, and it did not travel intact. Every new room demanded confirmation. That afternoon, the atmosphere was neither tense nor relaxed. It was anticipatory in a subdued way, like air waiting to shift. Conversations continued, but they shortened. Movement slowed slightly, as if people were reserving energy without realizing why. The idea of a challenge had not been formally stated. No one declared terms. Yet it existed all the same, suspended between glances and unfinished sentences. In rooms like this, challenges were not issued, they emerged. Someone would test proximity. Someone else would respond by not moving. Lee noticed everything without appearing to watch. He adjusted his stance once, then left alone. His posture was upright, but unremarkable. No bouncing, no stretching that suggested preparation for display. If anything, he appeared to be conserving attention rather than attracting it. Those who had trained with him before recognized this phase. It was not readiness in the conventional sense. It was alignment. He seemed less concerned with what might happen than with being correctly placed if it did. Outside the gym, the day continued without interruption. Traffic passed. People walked by unaware that anything was pending inside. This anonymity mattered. What would happen here was not meant for record or repetition. It would exist only in memory, passed from person to person, changing slightly each time. Within the room, reputations, some earned, some assumed, stood quietly alongside each other. No one spoke of outcomes. No one needed to. The environment itself was doing the work, narrowing possibilities, removing excess. Whatever occurred next would not be loud, but it would be decisive. The challenger arrived later. He did not need to announce himself. His presence did that work. He was built in a way that left little room for ambiguity. Broad shoulders, heavy limbs, a posture shaped by years of relying on mass rather than adjustment. When he stepped onto the mat, the floor answered him audibly, not with crack or a warning, just a reminder of weight. Those who knew him understood the pattern. He was not reckless. He was not cruel. But he had learned, over time, that most problems yielded when pressure was applied long enough. Size had resolved disagreements for him before. It had shortened conversations. It had ended demonstrations early. He did not scan the room aggressively. He didn't need to. His confidence was settled. Internal, reinforced by repetition. In his experience, technique eventually bowed to force. Perhaps not immediately, but always. Someone mentioned Lee's name, quietly, without emphasis. It was offered as information, not challenge. The larger man acknowledged it with a nod that carried no curiosity. He had seen skilled fighters before. He had absorbed them. Skill was something you managed. Weight was something you endured. The invitation, when it came, was unadorned. No insults preceded it. No raised voice. Just a suggestion framed as curiosity. Would Lee be willing to test something? Nothing formal. No audience arrangement. No extended rule set. A brief exchange, man to man, to see how things aligned. In the gym's culture, this was acceptable. Refusing would not have been shameful. But accepting meant something would be settled. Not publicly, perhaps, but permanently. Lee did not answer immediately. He did not posture. He did not ask clarifying questions. He took a moment to look at the floor between them, as if measuring distance rather than intent. When he agreed, it was with a slight nod. No words followed. That nod altered the room. The larger man stepped closer, closing space in a way that had unsettled others before. It was instinctive, practiced. He was testing boundaries without touching them. The response he received was absence, no retreat, no advance. Lee remained where he was, balanced, unconcerned with proximity. Those watching noticed the contrast. One man occupied space by filling it. The other did so by defining it. There was still time to disengage. No one would have intervened, but the invitation had already done its work. It had drawn a line that did not need to be spoken again. What separated the two men now was not just difference in size, but difference in certainty. One was confident in what had always worked. The other was confident in nothing except the moment as it existed. No one counted down. No signal was given. The room simply became quiet enough for the next thing to occur. The silence was not imposed. It arrived naturally as attention consolidated. Conversations ended mid-sentence and were not resumed. Those along the walls shifted their footing, not to get closer, but to steady themselves, as if proximity alone might disturb what was forming. There were no declared rules, yet everyone understood the boundaries. No prolonged exchange. No attempt to impress. Whatever happened would be brief. Because neither man appeared interested in duration, the absence of instruction made the moment heavier, not freer. Without structure, intention became visible. The larger man rolled his shoulders once. It was not bravado, more a habitual reset, the way he prepared for resistance. He had done this before in other rooms, under other lights. He expected engagement. He expected something to push against. Lee offered nothing of the sort. His breathing was steady, almost difficult to notice. His eyes were not fixed on the man's face, but on the line of movement between them, the space where action would have to pass. To observers, this was subtle enough to be mistaken for indifference. It was not. The crowd's attention sharpened. People began to register small things they would later describe with uncertainty. The stillness, the lack of tension in Lee's shoulders, the way his feet remained planted without appearing rooted. These details would not seem important until after they were gone. The larger man advanced half a step. Not a strike. Not yet. A test. His intent was to initiate contact on his terms, to feel resistance, to establish the exchange. He was accustomed to reactions, bracing, flinching, preemptive aggression. None came. Instead, there was a pause, so brief it barely qualified as one. In that pause, the balance of expectation shifted. Those watching sensed it, without understanding why. It felt as though the usual sequence had been interrupted. What followed did not resemble a contest. There was no shout, no tightening of faces, no outward sign of effort. Movement occurred in close range, compact and controlled, almost private. To some, it appeared as though nothing decisive had happened at all. And then it was over. The larger man was no longer standing in the same way. His posture had changed, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Weight redistributed itself without instruction. His feet adjusted as if searching for ground that had moved. No one spoke. The silence deepened, not with shock, but with recalibration. People were reassessing what they had just witnessed, replaying fragments that did not align with expectation. They had been watching closely, yet clarity had slipped past them. Lee stepped back once, just enough to indicate completion. The room did not exhale. It remained suspended, waiting for understanding to catch up. Those closest tried to explain it first. Not aloud, internally. They searched for something familiar. A throw, a strike, a joint force beyond tolerance. But none of the usual categories held. What they had seen did not resolve into a named technique. There had been contact, yes, brief and precise. But it lacked the markers people relied on to assign meaning. No wind-up, no visible struggle, no collision of strength against strength. It was as if one action had been absorbed into another before it could fully exist. The larger man remained upright, but the confidence that had shaped his posture moments earlier was gone. He did not stagger. He did not fall. That absence unsettled people more than a dramatic collapse would have. He looked intact, and yet something essential had been removed. Those who understood movement began to recognize what had occurred only after the fact. Balance had been addressed before power could be applied. Intention had been intercepted before it became action. The demonstration was not about winning an exchange, but about denying one. Lee did not watch the man for a reaction. He did not assess damage or wait for acknowledgement. He had already turned his attention inward, checking alignment, breathing, position. The moment for him had concluded when his necessity ended. Someone near the back shifted, the sound of shoe against concrete breaking the stillness. It felt intrusive. The room seemed to resist returning to normal rhythm. The larger man straightened slowly, not from injury, but from recalibration. His eyes moved, not scanning for threats, but searching memory. He was replaying the instant, trying to locate the point at which control had left him. There was no obvious answer. He nodded once, not to Lee, but to the space between them. It was an acknowledgement without language, an understanding that what had occurred could not be solved by repetition. No one asked for another demonstration. Lee gathered his things without urgency. No expression suggested satisfaction or restraint, only neutrality. He had not come to make a point. The point had emerged on its own. As people began to move again, conversations resumed carefully, altered in tone. Explanations were tentative. Words like timing and structure surfaced, then faded. Nothing fully captured what had been taken from the larger man or given to those watching. The gym did not return to how it had been before. Something subtle had been introduced, and it will remain long after the mats were cleared. The larger man stayed longer than expected. He did not leave immediately, nor did he seek conversation. He remained near the edge of the mat, hands resting at his sides, posture no longer assertive but not diminished either. What had changed was less visible. It was the absence of assumption. Those nearby noticed he was no longer occupying space by default. He adjusted himself to the room, rather than expecting the room to adjust to him. This was not humiliation. It was something quieter and far rarer. When someone finally spoke to him, asking if he was all right, he answered without irritation. He said yes, and he meant it. There was no injury to explain, no soreness to point to, nothing that could be treated, stretched, or trained away. That was the problem. He did not ask for a rematch. Not that day. Not later. The idea did not surface because it no longer fit the situation. Repetition would not clarify what had happened. It would only confirm it. In the following days, those who trained with him noticed small changes. He warmed up longer. He tested movements before committing weight to them. He began asking questions he had never needed to ask before about balance, about timing, about what preceded force rather than followed it. He spoke less about dominance, not because he had been defeated, but because dominance had revealed its limits. Lee did not follow up. There was no conversation afterward, no explanation offered privately. He did not frame the moment as instruction. He allowed it to stand without commentary, trusting that what had been demonstrated would either be understood or ignored. That, too, was part of the lesson. The encounter did not spread immediately. There were no stories told that night with dramatic emphasis. People struggled to describe what they had seen without overstating it. The lack of spectacle made exaggeration difficult, but the effect persisted. Certainty, once removed, does not announce its absence. It simply fails to return. And for the man who had relied on it, that absence would shape every physical decision he made from then on. The room where it happened remained unchanged in appearance. But for those who had been there, it now carried a reference point, one that could not be argued with, only remembered. Years passed without the incident being formally recorded. It was not written down in training manuals. It was not mentioned in interviews. No footage surfaced, and no effort was made to preserve it as proof. Yet it endured, moving quietly through circles where proof was unnecessary. Those who had been present told it cautiously, not as a victory story, but as a reference. When conversations drifted toward strength or size or the reliability of intimidation, someone would eventually mention that afternoon. They would not embellish it. They would simply say they had seen something resolved without force being displayed. Details varied. Some remembered the movement as almost invisible. Others recalled only the silence afterward. A few disagreed on exactly how long it took, but they all agreed on one thing. The outcome had felt inevitable once it occurred. The larger man continued training for years. He never spoke publicly about the incident, but those close to him understood its place in his development. It had not ended his confidence. It had refined it. He became harder to surprise, more deliberate in engagement. He no longer assumed that pressure would reveal truth. He waited for truth to reveal itself. Lee's path moved on, as it always had. He carried the moment with him only insofar as it informed his ongoing work. He did not cite it as evidence of superiority. He did not frame it as philosophy. It existed as one of many quiet confirmations that efficiency did not require display, and that mastery was often mistaken for restraint. Over time, the story detached itself from the specifics of the room. It became less about who was present and more about what was witnessed. New listeners, unfamiliar with the names involved, still understood its weight. They recognized the pattern. Challenge offered, control demonstrated, lesson absorbed without instruction. In this way, the incident outlived its participants. It became part of a lineage of moments that resist simplification, moments that do not resolve into slogans or techniques, but remain intact precisely because they are difficult to describe. They demand reflection rather than admiration. Those who heard the story years later often paused afterward, not to ask questions, but to reconsider assumptions they had carried quietly, about strength, about presence, about what truly ends a confrontation. Nothing about the afternoon suggested spectacle. Nothing about it demanded to be remembered. And yet it was, not because someone was defeated, but because something false was removed. And once removed, it never returned. The room itself eventually changed. New mats replaced the old. Different people trained there. But the silence that followed those 11 seconds lingered in the telling, steady and unforced. A reminder that mastery does not announce itself. It simply leaves nothing to argue with.